Okay, thank you everyone for coming along, and thank you for staying all the way to the end of the night. Tonight, I'd like to tell you a bit of a story about how the product growth team at Atlassian came to be, and the journey to get to where we are today. I'm going to cover some of the challenges that Atlassian faced as a company or as a business in growing, some of the challenges that the team faced within Atlassian as a large organization, as well as some of the lessons that we learned as a team. Just a quick warning for you though, this isn't a talk about the growth tactics, and it is not particularly marketing focused. So for some story time now. I've been on the product growth team here for 4 years. Actually, I think next week is possibly my anniversary. Before that, I was a developer at a bank. At the bank, a project generally was about 6 months long. And we would then release to customers at the end of that and then all go party on the bank's money. After one such release, I asked the team, how did we go? And the team went silent for a bit. And then they said to me, well, we heard no feedback so far. I think we've done a really good job. So when I was applying for Atlassian, the recruiter asked me, how about, do you want to roll as a growth hacker on the product growth team? And I said, what's that? All right. Well, I thought I'd give it a go. And in the interview with the head of growth at the time, they asked me, how do you measure the success of your projects? And I said, I know this one. If you hear no feedback, you've done a good job, right? He looked at me with pity in his eyes and he said, what if I told you that I could push a change to customers in 1 day and I could tell you exactly how that change went in 1 week? And I said, all right, sign me up. So here I am. I joined a team that was half a year old. They had 4 members. We had a team lead, a data analyst, and 2 developers. When the team started, they had 6 months to prove that they could do this growth hacking thing, or that was it. Atlassian would stop doing growth hacking from then on. When I joined the team, they'd just made that 6-month mark, and we were given another 6 months to prove that we could make an impact on the metrics, or we were over. And our mission at the time was to learn from industry growth hacking techniques to increase the number of users and their engagement and activity within our Jira and Confluence products. And that mission was given to us by our co-founder, Mike. We shied away a bit from acquisition and top of the funnel because our philosophy at the time was that the best marketing tool is the product. A good product is the best marketing tool that we have. But also partially because we were a team of developers, so that was our expertise. And also the marketing team is actually in San Francisco, and we're in Sydney. So hence, not so much marketing in this talk. We were guided by one principle that was set to us from the head of growth, Sean Close. And he said to us, if customers see value in what we offer, they'll use it. And then if they continue to see value, they'll pay us for it. And so with that in mind, this is how we worked. First of all, we measured everything by conversions. But at the time, by conversions, I mean converting free trials to paying customers. However, at the time, we had 30-day trials, and we didn't count, for some reason, a conversion on the first month. We counted them on the second month. So this actually took us 60 days to measure. And looking at it now, I wouldn't even call that conversion. Maybe retention. So the 60-day measure is a pretty big flaw in that metric. But actually, by the time I joined the team, the data analysts made a model where we could predict within 7 days if somebody would convert after 60. And that's how we graded all of our experiments. The goal as a team of developers was to pump out as many experiments as we could, as quickly as we could. So the assumption was that 1 in 5 experiments would be successful. So if we hit those 5 experiments as quickly as we could, we're going to hit more successes, right? So we measured ourselves on the rate at which we could ship experiments, or some people know that as experiment cadence. And the roles at the time was that each developer would own an idea from start to finish. So we'd come up with a growth hack, and we would implement it. And so essentially we had a team of generalists. The developer would do a little bit of design, would do a little bit of analysis, maybe even a bit of product management. And it was very much just throw ideas on the wall and see what sticks. And we delivered all of those A/B tests. When I say experiments, by the way, I mean A/B tests. We delivered all of that through a system that was built in one hackathon, so 24 hours. And back then, Optimizely wasn't quite as big a thing. So we entirely relied on this one system that was built in a very, very quick time. And we actually ended up using that system for about a year before it couldn't scale with our needs anymore. So with that approach, what are some of the ideas we tried? We used to come up with experiment ideas by going and signing up for our products and then basically going, oh, that's a bit of an awkward experience. Well, that was painful. What's the friction point there? But because of the way we worked, they're generally very small ideas or cheap ideas and sort of small gambles that were quick to implement. So when we tackled onboarding at the time, we knew there was a steep learning curve for our products. So we tried all sorts of different ideas. We tried really simple things, just checklists. We had videos, onboarding videos. We did help hints and pop-ups. These sorts of ideas gave us very small incremental gains. And in fact, actually, normally the result would be there was no difference at all. And that was quite typical. At the time as well, we weren't very good at taking a successful idea and actually productionizing it. So our experiments were throwaway ideas, code that would run for a week, and that was it. But what it required to productionize was to convince a product team that a successful idea is actually worth implementing. It's better than something else on their roadmap that customers want. In the end, the learning for me from these onboarding experiments was that it's a full-time job for a team. Onboarding is very hard. You've got tens of minutes to impress somebody at the start. And so in the end, each product ended up forming their own team dedicated towards onboarding. Along the lines of small experiments we've tried, one day we realized that in the product, the customer can't even pay us. That seems a bit weird, right? You had to leave the product to be able to update your payment details. So we tried a very simple idea, and it's just add a link to the payment section of the site. It turns out if you make it easier for customers to pay you, well, they're more likely to pay you. I think the learning for me here was that you don't need to overthink the problems. We don't need to over-engineer solutions. Sometimes all you need is the right link in the right place. The next experiment is one of my favorites. It was, I think, our first and only behind the firewall experiment. Back in the day, if you wanted to use Jira for a development team, what you needed was Jira Agile. It was a plugin, also known as Greenhopper previously. In fact, we knew the majority of our customers were already using both. They were using Jira and Jira Agile together. But in order to get Jira Agile, you had to go to the marketplace, you had to download it, and then you had to apply for a new license. It was very involved. And actually, if you basically already knew, you had to basically already know what to do to get there. So we made a simple one-click setup. During your installation, you can choose either Agile or Service Desk. And this actually ended up leading to a 5% and a 2% boost, respectively, for that cross-sell. These numbers might seem small, but actually, at the scale of Atlassian, they can be worth quite a lot. The learning for me here was that making it easier for users to get what they already want will make it more likely for them to get there, to their end goal. And we actually ended up taking these bundles to our cloud offering as well. So we had some wins and we had some learnings, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were a whole bunch of issues with establishing a new team with a new way of working in an already established organization. So what were some of these pain points? We had very poor analytics coverage within our products. It was really hard to make accurate decisions and analysis of our opportunities, especially when in the first experience of the customer, we only knew about half of what they were doing. It also meant that the way we worked also meant that our experiments were very small and restricted. So the potential impact we were looking at wasn't very large either. And our infrastructure was always playing catch up. But the biggest issue of all, I believe, was that we were really bad at the statistics. We weren't even good at calculating cohort sizes that we needed. We weren't even good at baselining. And this often led to needing to rerun experiments because the results were just invalid. Finally, I think this is an interesting issue that a lot of companies might hit, is we hit a local maxima. We ended up, our experiment wins started to dry up as our conversion rate got higher and higher. We weren't confident anymore that we could move that metric. So what did we do? We halved our conversion rate. Sounds weird, right? Yeah. But hear me out, okay? We took a step back. We reevaluated the whole funnel that we had. We knew that in the product we couldn't really get many more wins, but we worked further up, and we realized that there was a lot of drop-off even before the evaluation begins. At the time, we were asking for all sorts of details, like we wanted your credit card even though we weren't planning to charge you for your trial. We wanted your address before you'd even signed up. These are all points of friction, and the customer had to be very committed before they would even start a trial. And that's why we ended up with a really high conversion rate that we couldn't move. So we thought, okay, we'll run an experiment. It's going to address all of these things in one go. It's a simple landing page. You give us your name and your email, one click, and you're through to the product. No longer do you need a credit card. No longer do you need to give us your address. So how did that go? Well, we doubled our signups, right? But we actually ended up with less conversions at the end. That's really weird, right? To add insult to injury, because we doubled our signups, our hosting costs rocketed up as well. So it was a double financial hit, actually. We had far more evaluators coming through, but they were far less committed to buying our products. It seems that when we skipped all these steps, we weren't able to effectively convey what value our products gave our customers anymore. So obviously we couldn't go ahead with this, but we didn't leave it there. We analyzed the different factors in that experiment, and we came up with a new combination that we thought would be a winning combination. We removed the credit card requirement on sign-up. We decreased the trial length to 7 days. And this is for a couple of reasons. First of all, we needed to push our hosting costs down, right? But also because we needed to now add a sense of urgency to conversion because we had far less committed customers. With the data that we already had from our products, plus the data from that experiment, we were able to make a prediction that was right on the money. We doubled our trials again, and we kept the same number of conversions. So what that meant to us was actually still a financial loss initially, but what we've done now is we've opened up our growth opportunity. So that's how we went about that problem. My observation from this was that in-product changes are able to give us those small iterative changes that can keep the snowball rolling, but pricing changes are able to give us dramatic step changes. But we just have to be careful that it's not a dramatic loss. So now we had all these extra evaluators coming in. We needed to convert them. Together with the design team, we came up with this initiative called Engaging First Impressions. We really wanted to impress our customers in their first experience and make sure they stick around and pay us. The primary metric for that initiative was product usage. And so this was the goal we had at the time. Increase product usage in the first week by 20%. Right? How do we know we chose the right metric here, though? So there's a few factors that go into that. First of all, are we able to move this metric? We knew based on previous experiments, we were fairly confident that we could change usage behavior. And in hindsight, I can say, yes, we could definitely move this number. How big is the opportunity? We knew this was a huge opportunity because we created the opportunity ourselves. We doubled our evaluators. We were very confident that this was the right opportunity to target at the time, and in fact, probably the most important opportunity that we had at Atlassian. But most importantly, does the team believe in the metric? We had long arguments about whether moving usage up is actually a good thing. What does it mean when you increase the usage of a customer? Does it mean that they saw more value in your product, so hence they used it more? Or actually, did it mean they were more confused by the UI and just didn't get what was going on, so it took them longer to learn? And the team just could not agree what this metric meant. And once the team doesn't believe in the metric, then you're set up for failure for your initiative. So a year later now, our team has grown. I think it's doubled, in fact, or more even. To a degree, we'd proven ourselves as a growth team now. We proved that we could move metrics. We proved that we could move conversion, engagement. Importantly, we still had our jobs on the growth team. That was good. But how do we bring the company along for the ride now? That comes with a whole new set of challenges. What we wanted were product teams that were taking on the growth methodology. They wanted to be data-driven. They wanted to experiment. They didn't want to take done as a release, but as an actual improvement on the customer experience. So our issues were in building trust. We were an independent team previously that didn't talk to product teams until we had a success. We said, hey, look, this thing works. Can you implement it for us? What we needed from the product teams as well was analytics coverage. We already knew that. We didn't know half of what the evaluators were doing in the first experiences. We also wanted to help these teams measure the success of their features, to find new opportunities in their products based on that data. We had challenges in scale. How does a team of 8 people influence a company of 500? How do we convince them to work in a different way, to measure their goals differently, to think about conversion and evaluators when they're building out new features? This is all something that was entirely new to them. The definition of done was just, we finished our sprint, we're good. And what would be the ultimate form of our growth team? Do we want to keep growing as a single team and become a very, very, very large team? Or do we want maybe every product to have a growth team, or to have every team be a growth team? These were some of the challenges that we're facing, as well as some of the biases when we were talking to teams. When we reported successes, we'd often see hindsight bias. People would say to us, yeah, of course that would win. That's way better. But then we'd ask them, so if it was so obvious, why didn't you build it earlier? And as I said, we wanted to change the definition of done. Teams were celebrating releases and not outcomes being moved. And then finally, as well, we'd often hear teams telling us they don't need data. We know what the customer wants. But actually, often we found that the qualitative data was at odds with the quantitative data. And this is why we wanted more analytics. So what are some of the things we tried? We tried this thing called product outreach teams. So every week, we would have 2 people from the growth team. They would catch up with the product team, and they would say, here are some graphs, here's some of the data that you've already got, here's some opportunity analysis. Can you give us a few more analytics events in your product, please? Because of these efforts, we ended up accidentally becoming the team that championed data across the organization. But we were able to successfully build up awareness of growth tactics and experimentation and data. Another idea we tried was SWAT teams. SWAT teams were these cross-disciplined, cross-team teams. So we'll pull people from Jira, we'll pull people from growth, we'll pull people from the marketing team, we'll pull a little bit of everybody so that every stakeholder there is completely bought in and they believe in the ideas from start to finish. And they will target a particular metric. For example, maybe we'll target Jira onboarding. These were ended up being quite successful and were also able to help spread the growth methodology to teams outside of growth. Something else we also tried was blog posts. So we would often, every week, we would share some of the ideas we tried, some of the successes we got, and this was a great way to get buy-in from the rest of the organization. And finally, to address the biases, we actually came up with this thing called kebab bets. It's a bit weird. So basically, you record what you thought an experiment would do before the experiment happens, so no hindsight bias anymore, and you put your money where your mouth is. So you bet somebody that a kebab on the result of the experiment. And what we do afterwards is now we've got this history or a log of basically what you thought before and after an experiment. So you can help tune your intuition towards what our customers will respond to with experimentation. There was actually one more idea that I forgot to put on the slide. We built a tool called Release Buster. It was a way to visualize the performance of your features before and after a release. So essentially, today you could pay for any analytics SaaS offering and that will give you that. But that was fun at the time to help show product teams that even when they released a feature, they weren't necessarily making an impact. So now, another year on, the team's grown again. We've now moved to actually dedicated teams. So we went from a small team of generalists to a large team of specialists now. We had an analytics team that included our data scientists, the data analysts, some data pipeline engineers. They would do the deep dive analysis on our products. They would give us our opportunity analysis, and they would also ensure that the data is getting to us reliably. We had a self-sufficient experiment team with its own team lead, now tackling bigger, more audacious experiments, trying to move the needle in a bigger way. And finally, we had now a dedicated experiment tooling team, so infrastructure team, working on our A/B testing platform. So still we're not hiring an optimizer or anything like that. It's a full in-house dedicated platform because it can give us much faster performance. In fact, 0 millisecond delay on a decision for an A/B test. So you could see that our team size was dramatically increasing. We had to decide now, what is growth going to look like in the coming years? We needed to put an org structure in place for us to grow. We went out to look at what the rest of the industry was doing in this area. So we found predominantly there were two models. There was a centralized growth team and a decentralized growth team model. The centralized growth team, what it would give you is a consistency in approach to experimentation and comparable results across products or across parts of the funnel potentially. But that team can work autonomously, so they don't report to another power. They can make their own decisions. But in a centralized world, the team will have to get bigger and bigger and bigger to match your organization size. In a decentralized world, essentially where you've got an embedded team, a growth team in every product or in every part of the funnel that you're working in, they will work more effectively with those product teams because they're actually part of one of them. And because of that, they'll be more likely to make a change to, say, a product roadmap to get a winning idea on. We actually ended up with a combination of both. We tried to get the best of both worlds. We have a centralized team now, which I'm part of, that continues to develop the best practice in growth and owns experimentation that other teams don't want to tackle. It's too hard. And then we have experiment teams that are embedded in the product. They'll work closely in helping to decide the roadmap and decide what are the best opportunities for a product. And in order to achieve that, we started this thing called the incubation process. We ended up taking whole, fully formed, self-sufficient teams, and we would pair them with a couple of people from the growth team. And after 6 months, they would transition on back into the product as just a product team that happens to do growth. While we were teaching these teams the growth methodology, though, we ended up actually learning a few things about how to form a growth team. And in all honesty, not all of these incubators were equally as successful. So here are some of my observations of what forms the critical components to form a good growth team. So the first person you need, I believe, is a product manager that is data savvy. They can help you identify your opportunity space. They can get the team focused on the best opportunity with the right goals. And they'll help you develop a long-term plan on how to maximize that metric that you're targeting. And the second most important, but probably I would say about equally important, is the data analyst. Together with the PM, they'll help you scope and prioritize your opportunity based on how much impact you might be able to achieve. And then they'll give you a clear metric that is both movable and measurable, and that the team can believe in. So remember earlier with the increased user usage in the first week, the team didn't believe in that idea, and so we were set to fail. After the incubation process, actually, another team joined the growth team, and they were lacking an analyst at the time because we couldn't hire, and they also suffered from the same issue where the metric was not measurable at all. I think later on you can add developers and designers who will give you interesting solutions and an ability to to execute experiments quickly. Now you might be thinking, where are the marketers? I can't say from experience. The few initiatives we have worked with marketing, so the SWAT teams, they actually worked very, very, very well. The marketers were able to give us a better understanding of our target audience and how to message them. But I think in the teams that we work in today, that responsibility is spread sort of across product management, design, and research. So what does the team look like today? It's now a bit too big to fit all the faces onto one slide, so I've given you blocks instead. All the embedded growth teams, or the incubators, have completely moved out. They've all graduated. They're working with the product teams now. But the core team is now composed of multiple smaller, self-sufficient units. In fact, we ended up taking the structure from the incubators and using them to form our growth teams. Each team has its own short-term and long-term vision, and they completely own one part of the funnel or a particular metric. And it's up to them how they want to optimize that metric. A particular team is like the incubator team, but now with designers and researchers. And also now they are tackling bigger ideas and more complete flows. So if you remember the early days, we'll talk about small experiments and small modifications. Bringing the designers and the researchers on board has allowed us to actually create whole flows. Some of the other teams that were in the previous slide actually represent whole new capabilities for the organization. So one team was actually the voice of the customer that was tasked to measure end user feedback. And they chose the tool NPS. And when we were rolling this metric out, actually, we used A/B testing, first of all, to check that showing the survey itself isn't going to negatively impact our users. And then secondly, to see the way you present the survey, is that going to affect the results? And definitely it does. So if you need to fudge your NPS, run some experiments. One observation for me, though, is that actually NPS as a metric, was much easier for product teams to adopt. One reason for that was because as part of NPS, we also had open text feedback. And that open text feedback was more human and understandable. And so while we spent years trying to move teams based on our analytics, some open text feedback from NPS was much more effective at getting the roadmaps to change, to meet customer behavior and customer needs. Another capability we brought onto the growth team was the engagement platform. Their mission was to make our users experts and to help them find more value in our products. So in order to do this, they needed to be targeted, contextual messages that were self-service messages brought on by product managers and marketing. And all of the messages need to be A/B tested. And so when a product marketer puts a message into the engagement platform that targets a specific customer segment, immediately afterwards, if the message was spammy, it will be killed immediately. And if this message was successful at reaching its goals, then it will be productionized and live on. One example of a message that we've put together is when customers are moving multiple Jira issues from the backlog to a board, and they do this a few times in a row, then we'll help them and say, hey, by the way, there's this bulk action you can do. So it's very targeted in the moment or in the context of the action that they're trying to do. And what sort of experiments do we do now? So no longer are they these tiny small gambles. They're highly targeted opportunities, right? So research has gone into it beforehand to understand the use cases of the customer. So here's an example. We're creating actually whole new product features. They use the engagement platform that I mentioned earlier, as well as touching multiple systems. So in this instance, we are, it's basically a cross-sell. We want Jira customers, we think they work better if they put their documentation in Confluence. And so there are a whole bunch of limitations in that flow. So for example, here we are giving access, copying users' permissions all the way across to a new product, which they couldn't do before. And in this example, we're actually owning a whole new feature. So we've gone from small throwaway code and minor changes to actually the growth team is now owning features in production that are driving users. So I think that sort of speaks to why our organization has, or our team structure has had to change over the years, while we needed dedicated designers and researchers and developers. Importantly, it's no longer a 6-month, I'm no longer working with 6-month projects with a big release at the end. We're iterating on solutions and then compiling experiments together from smaller experiments that were already successful. And of course, we have data and feedback every step of the way now. So before I go to questions, that's the end of my talk. Before I go to questions, I just wanted to repeat that we are hiring. If you enjoyed any parts of the story and want to grow with us, please talk to anybody with these t-shirts or the 2 recruiters at the front. Thank you very much. And do you have any questions? Unmute.
Recording is now stuff.
Well, maybe I'll just repeat your question.
Just shout it out.
Yeah.
Great talk, thanks.
Thank you.
Lots of questions, but I'll just have one. You talked earlier about people clicking around and getting confused by the user interface, or are they highly engaged?
Yes.
How did you actually fix that? How did you fix that one out?
So the question was, are people clicking around the user interface highly engaged, or are they confused by the UI? I think with the metric we were measuring, that was the wrong approach. So if I go back to the original phrase from the head of growth that if a customer sees value in our products, they'll pay us, actually changing that metric meant we were more able to measure our initial goal, if that makes sense. No? Okay, so.
If they paid you more, then they probably enjoy it.
No, so in this case, it was more an example of did they enjoy their first experience? And so the hypothesis there is that if they did, they'll pay us for it. Right, so they'll convert. So really conversion there was probably a better metric. Does that make sense? So the example was that the metric itself was flawed. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Good. Thank you. Questions?
This one works, yep.
You seem to go a lot for data and metrics. What about actually talking with whoever the user is and trying to?
Yep. So I think, yes, you could say we were out of touch with the qualitative data side. And I think this is why we brought on designers and researchers. And so they were able, so we had more user tests. And they were able to bring us the qualitative side of it and the understanding of the use cases and real customers. And then so the developers were able to sit in on those and actually get a better feel for it. But if you think about, so the team structure we originally had was all developers and analysts. And there's obviously a natural inclination there towards the quantitative data side. And also I think one other thing they brought us was the designers and researchers brought us was more early signal testing. So we could actually throw out some of our ideas earlier on based on qualitative feedback or improve them first before we took them to scale. Does that help?
Any more questions?
Thanks for the talk. I was really... Can you hear me? Oh, great. One of the things that really impressed me is you've learned from your customers by looking at analytics. You've also learned from yourselves about what processes work internally. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've developed those insights into what works and what doesn't in terms of running your teams and structuring things?
Yep.
Do you have regular meetings, or how do you kind of figure that stuff out?
There's a lot in that question, I think. Let me think of an answer. So in general, I think the way our teams work, we really actually like to experiment on our process as well. So in terms of process, we're quickly able to figure out what works and doesn't work by trial and error. In terms of org structure, I think we just had to try it out and go through the pain points, really. I mean, obviously, before you do a restructure, you're always thinking this is going to be the best move, and it doesn't always turn out to be the case. So not sure if there's a good answer there for you.
Or how do you kind of internally learn from your own experiences, if you know what I mean?
From a small team scale, we have retrospectives normally every fortnight that can really bubble up those issues. From a larger team scale, I think the issues tend to bubble up from management through one-on-ones and then as well through larger team retros as well. But we also do, I suppose one thing that's useful is we do offsites probably once a year. It's a chance for the whole team to get together, really the broader team, and really bubble up their frustrations in terms of how we work and where we think we've lost efficiency, that sort of thing. Does that answer your question? Fair enough. There's a question at the back, I think.
Thanks, Herman. I want to ask, how do you differentiate between non-performing experiment and non-performing team?
So we want to differentiate between non-performing experiments and non-performing teams. I think the first thing comes from trust. So everybody that was hired at Atlassian has come through at a high bar. So we believe that everybody should be able to achieve success given the right environment. So often the first thing we question is the process to get to the experiment rather than the team. Does that help answer your question? Yes.
Any more questions?
So you know how your growth team was structured from the beginning to where it is now? You know, you talked about research and designers coming on board later. Do you feel like that was just the natural process of the growth team, or do you feel like, you know, had the researchers and designers come on board at an early stage, you would have had a better boost in growth than from earlier on? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if we had designers on earlier, would we have better growth? I think, well, designers and engineers actually both very, very much like to oversolve problems. And I think depending on who you have, let me think, sorry. So I don't think necessarily that we would have done it differently. So as a group of developers, we were very much able to hack on things very quickly. And I think it was actually to our advantage that we didn't do much research early on. We got to try lots of ideas and understand actually what the growth process is about. If we had slowed down either for engineering or for design, I don't think we would have learned as many things as early on as a small team. But definitely in the middle stages, if we had brought on designers earlier, I think we could have had more chances at bigger wins.
Any more questions? Yep.
You mentioned early on that one of the areas that you looked at was how do we make it easy for people to perform or complete the tasks that they were trying to do at that time. So I was curious, did you discover any interesting relationships between conversion and particular types of tasks or goals that people were trying to do with the software?
We have tried endlessly to answer that question. And always the question comes back, is it correlation or causation? And so obviously you find a correlation, you try to experiment on it and see if it's causation. And at the end of the day, I think we still haven't found a golden metric. But what we did find that was often when we're trying to chase down that causation, we would optimize for the wrong things. For example, we found that customers that created 3 or more issues were successful. So we tried to push them to create 3 or more issues. But actually, that doesn't really help the customer, does it? So, yeah. So that's an example.
Okay. If there's any more questions, thank you, Herman.
Thank you for coming.